I think at the heart of experimental film is a profound sense of curiosity. If we think about the earliest days of cinema, it started as an experimentation. You know, what would happen if we pointed a camera at a baby eating, you know, his or her breakfast? What if we pointed the camera at a train and coming into a station? We've never seen what we look like on camera before, so it was all about experimenting. And you know, think about a scientist who has a hypothesis and what might happen if, and an artist who experiments with cinematic form, I think, does some of the same. What might happen if?
Film is everywhere now. It's on your television, it's on your phone, it's in the theaters, they tell me.
I haven't noticed.
But it's in your car when you back up.
It is.
It's everywhere. So what makes a film experimental?
There's so much socialization around how a movie should look.
Right.
What a movie should be. But what interests me about that art form is it's really difficult to define it. It's a very dynamic form. So, you know, if you think about a Western or if you think about a romantic comedy, sure, you could push the boundaries of what that might be, but there's some tropes that one might expect to find in a Western. If you went to see a Western and there wasn't a cowboy, or if there wasn't a horse, or if there wasn't a cowboy hat, or a six-shooter, you know. And there's different ways of registering it. Some people call it experimental film, some people call it personal cinema, some people, I particularly like undependent cinema rather than independent.
Nice. I like that.
It's a form that in some ways responds to what's out there in some very interesting ways. Sometimes artists will experiment with what that relationship is with narrative form, perhaps. Sometimes an artist might think about the technology itself. Some artists are very interested in what I like to call dead technology. Yeah. How can I reappropriate that? How is there still something I can glean from that that is culturally relevant, or that might be able to respond to some things that interest me?
So in the creation of an experimental film, how does one pull it out of the firmament, as it were? What sort of techniques are we using? What are we talking about?
I'm particularly interested in how dynamic the genre is, if we can call it a genre, and how it moves and changes and shifts as new and old technologies come about or are discarded. There's a film called Splice Lines by a Canadian filmmaker, Clint Ines, and he took another experimental film by Kurt Kren from the 1960s called Mama und Papa, and it was a documentation about bodies. It was a very visceral film, and it was very well known for how many splices. It was made on 16 millimeter film. How many hundreds and hundreds of splices were in this film. Kind of a difficult one to run through a projector with all the splices. And what Clint did was he took only those splice lines, those moments where the tape connected those splices, and made his own movie out of it.
Oh my.
And so what you see essentially is just glue and the irregularities of the glue as it runs through a projector. We're both looking directly at the film, a formal exercise, you might say, not unlike, say, abstract painting that's thinking very much about what that relationship between paint and canvas is. But at the same time, it sort of transcends that.
Borrowing from John Chardy, how does a film mean? When I watch an experimental film, what am I expecting? How do I want to be affected? What's the emotion I'm looking for?
Often I talk about experimental filmmakers as being the traveling troubadours of our day.
Yes.
You know, and I'm thinking about this because I show films from around the world, and you know, maybe you've got an artist from a little village in Romania, maybe you've got an artist from Serbia, maybe you've got an artist from Havana, and they're sharing, and that idea of sharing, I think, is very important in this form. They're sharing their particular view of the world from their particular corner of the world.
Right.
And Diana Fonseca's film, Walking Under the Sun, is the title of it. What I love about that film is often, not always, but when we think about Cuba, and it's sort of in the news these days, we think about Castro, we think about cigars, we think about sugarcane and the politics of the country, the beautiful old cars. But so what Diana did was, in a sense, sort of undermine or flip on its head those expectations. And here, it's this simple little film. This is where I live, and I'm going to show you.
In you watching an experimental film, I mean, what are you looking for when you walk away and you have that sort of the poetic smile of like, oh, that really what? So how do you differentiate this experimental film from, if I may, that experimental film?
The short answer would be, I'm looking to be surprised. I'd like to think that if we all gave ourselves a chance and the opportunity and trusted our own maybe aesthetic inner voice, that we'd be open to some of these more unusual, surprising kinds of cinematic forms. And I don't mean that in terms of it's got to be 100% original, because I don't really believe in that notion of originality. Everything comes from somewhere. And so what interests me and what might be surprising is to see somebody pull from here, to pull from here, and to pull from here, these histories, art histories, cultural histories, social histories, political histories, and munch them together in a way that I've never seen before. And that is really exciting. An example might be a film by Jorge Lorenzo, a one-frame 35mm film. When he submitted it to the festival, I thought, wait a minute, he's going to show it in 35. How are we going to run it through the projector? Is it just a single frame? He's going to pop it into the projector and pew, out it goes. There was a lot of black leader on either side of this one frame. And the one frame was simply a clapboard with his name on it.
Oh, yes, I saw it. Yes.
That film definitely raises the question of how long should a film be? How long might a film be? Duration. What's the narrative arc, if there is one in that one frame? How do we assess that? How do we think about that in relationship to other kinds of cinematic forms?
And it's a blank slate.
When we showed that film at the festival, he got a standing ovation. He got more questions about that film than anything else. I would almost categorize his work as more conceptual art than cinema, but it is cinematic.
What is at the heart of experimental film?
That profound sense of curiosity that I think is a really important component of experimental film, I would hope would move an audience to think differently about their participation in a culture, their citizenry in a culture, rather than their sense of consumerism in a culture.
كم تبعد الطريق رقم 88 تبعد حوالي 7 ساعات. لقد قلت لك علينا الذهاب إلى سانتا-في.
And what I often say is that I'm very, very interested in inspiring an audience or inspiring a new generation to recognize the value of their media voices and to then participate in shaping future trends of cultural representation, including their voices.
Experimental film is egalitarian.
It is. I think it really is, or it can be. And some people think about experimental film as this elitist art form. I don't think about it that way. I think about it much more in an egalitarian sort of framing, and that it's about participation, and it has the potential of having this democratic quality to it, democratic in a very profound way.
Why is film so important to us?
Art for me is, if nothing else, gives us this really valuable barometric read of who we are as humans. And cinema has the potential of including all of the other arts. So it's a really, really important art form. And that's where also I like to make a distinction between art and entertainment. Entertainment for me is about reinforcing that which we already know. Art for me is about challenging those expectations. So if we take that kind of equation that I've just mapped out, I think that might help us think a little bit differently about cinema, or come back to maybe some of its value and some of its cultural importance.